He woke to the gentle light of a November sun, piercing to the thin curtains of the Hotel Texas Suite in Fort Worth. The clock on the nightstand ticked past 8 a.m., its sound swallowed by the quiet air of a morning too calm for the weight it carried. For John Fitzgerald Kennedy, President of the United States, it was just another campaign stop, or so it seemed. But history had already circled this date in ink darker than any could imagine. The city outside was restless with excitement. Crowds had been forming since dawn, their breath fogging in the crisp autumn air. Children clutched miniature American flags. Mothers balanced them on their hips, while fathers whispered stories about the young president who had dared to stand up to Moscow during the Cuban Missile Crisis, who had promised a moon, and who had made them believe once again in possibility. For them, Kennedy wasn't simply a politician. He was a symbol of youth, of hope, of America's finest hour yet to come. Inside, Jackie adjusted her pink Chanel suit in front of the mirror, the faint clicker of pearl earrings echoing like small gunshots in the silence. She turned slightly, checking away the fabric draped over her frame, smoothing it with gloved fingers. The suit was elegant, iconic, and destined to be stained in memory forever. Kennedy caught a reflection, that poised elegance, and smiled. That smile, the one that had disarmed adversaries, seduced crowds, and won him a presidency. But behind it, Jackie could sense the weight pressing against him, a quiet shadow beneath the charm. "Do you think they'll like it?" Jackie asked softly, half to herself, adjusting her pillbox hat. "They'll love it," Kennedy replied, his Boston lilt warm and certain. "They'll love you more than me." He said it with a laugh, but the room held a silence afterward that neither of them named. The phone rang. It was an aide reminding him of the day's schedule. Breakfast speech at the hotel ballroom, flight to Dallas, motorcade through the city, a fundraising luncheon, routine, rehearsed, predictable. Yet in the undercurrent of that voice, there was an unspoken urgency. Tensions in Texas were high. Reports of hostility, protests, whispered threats. Kennedy listened, nodded, and ended the call with his usual calm. "We'll go on as planned." Fear was not an option. He had said it often enough that his staff stopped arguing. He believed visibility was power, and openness was strength. To hide behind tinted glass was to let suspicion win. To ride through the streets in an open-top limousine was not arrogance. It was defiance. He sat by the window for a moment, gazing out at Fort Worth. The streets were alive. Ordinary people craned their necks for a glimpse of the motorcade that had not yet begun. He could see them, or perhaps he only imagined them. The faces lit with anticipation, the waving hands, the homemade signs. Jackie joined him, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder. "It's a beautiful day," she whispered. "It is," he said. Then, almost inaudibly, as if confessing to glass, "Let's hope it stays that way." Behind him, Secret Service agents moved like shadows, quiet, deliberate, watchful. One checked the itinerary again. Another adjusted the radio transmitter. Their presence was routine, but their eyes betrayed nerves. Texas was unpredictable. Dallas, especially, was a city divided, simmering with resentment. Kennedy knew it, and yet here he was. A knock at the door. The aides entered, brisk but cheerful, reminding him of the speech ahead. Kennedy rose, straightened his tie, and slipped into the armor of charisma. In public, he was unshakable. In private, the man in the mirror seemed almost weary, a soldier at the edge of a battle no one else could see. As they walked down the hallway, Jackie by his side, the world outside roared to life. Supporters cheered as they caught a glimpse. Staff rushed to keep pace. Flashes from cameras cut to the dim hotel corridor like lightning. Each handshake, each smile, each small nod of acknowledgement. They felt ordinary, yet extraordinary when placed against the backdrop of what was coming. Because what no one in that hotel could hear was a silence in another part of Dallas. A man in a plain room, assembling a rifle, metal against wood, a bullet chambered with a click that would echo louder than any cheer. History had already begun tightening its grip. And so, the morning unfolded. The president, radiant in his youth, carrying the faith of millions. The First Lady, elegant in her iconic pink. The aides, bustling with logistics. The Secret Service, tense with invisible weight. On the surface, it was a day of celebration. Beneath, it was a countdown. The morning was only beginning, but time, though unseen, was already running out. The engines of Air Force One cut through the sky like a promise. Beneath it, Dallas stretched wide, restless, alive. The morning sun bathed the city in gold, masking the tension that lingered in its streets. At Love Field Airport, the crowd had been waiting for hours. Housewives in their Sunday best, children with paper flags, men in work shirts. Thousands pressed against the barriers, craning their necks, desperate for a glimpse of a man who had redefined what a president could be. For them, he wasn't just a leader. He was the future itself, walking in human form. When the blue and white aircraft appeared on the horizon, a ripple moved through the crowd. Gasps, cheers, arms raised. The plane descended with slow majesty, its wheels kissing the tarmac as if history itself were landing. The door opened. For a heartbeat, there was only silence, a collective breath. Then John F. Kennedy emerged. The sound was deafening. Applause, shouts, cries of joy. Children waved, women sobbed, men lifted their hats in salute. Jackie followed, radiant in her pink suit and pillbox hat, her smile reserved but luminous. Together, they descended the stairs, the Texas sun glinting off Jackie's pearls, Kennedy's hair catching the light like a halo. He reached the bottom and plunged into the crowd. Secret Service agents stiffened, their eyes scanning every face, every hand, every sudden movement. But Kennedy was unstoppable. He clasped hands, touched shoulders, spoke words drowned by cheers. He leaned close to mothers holding infants, towels of the hair young boys, bent down to speak to girls clutching flowers. For the people there, it was not a motorcade. It was a communion, a living bridge between power and the ordinary. And yet, in the quiet shadows of Dallas, resentment smoldered. Signs of protest had been torn down earlier that morning. Leaflets labeling Kennedy a traitor had been scattered in the streets. But here in this moment, it was all drowned out by the roar of love. The motorcade awaited, a gleaming, midnight blue 1961 Lincoln Continental convertible. The sun danced across its polished chrome, a carriage fit for royalty, though it was destined to become a coffin on wheels. Kennedy and Jackie took their seats in the rear, their posture elegant, their smiles effortless. Texas Governor John Connally and his wife Nellie sat in front of them, the governor turning often to exchange words with the president. Secret Service agents mounted the running boards of nearby cars, their eyes narrowed against the bright light, their hands near their weapons. The motorcade began to roll. Crowds lined the streets in waves, their cheers rising with every block. Faces blurred into a sea of adoration. Homemade signs bobbed above the heads. "Welcome, Mr. President. Dallas loves Jackie." From the sidewalks, people leaned forward as if to touch destiny itself. Kennedy waved, that practiced but genuine motion of the hand that seemed to belong both to him and to everyone watching. Jackie sat beside him, immaculate, regal, her hands sometimes lifting to wave, sometimes resting lightly in her lap. Their presence was magnetic. The sun shone brightly, almost cruelly, as if nature itself wanted the day remembered in perfect clarity. And then came the whispers. At the edges of the crowd, some onlookers muttered words of hate, their voices swallowed by the cheers. Some eyes glared instead of glowed. A few turned away, stiff, resentful. Dallas was divided. It loved Kennedy and it loathed him. He represented change, progress, a shift in the old order. To some, he was a savior. To others, a threat. The motorcade rolled on, oblivious of the cracks beneath the surface. Inside the limousine, the conversation was light. Jackie commented on the warmth of the reception. Nellie Connally leaned back and said with a smile, "You can't say Dallas doesn't love you, Mr. President." Kennedy chuckled, his voice low, almost ironic. "You certainly can't." It was a moment of joy, a moment of innocence, a moment destined to shatter. In the Texas School Book Depository, a man leaned against a sixth-floor window, eyes narrowing through a rifle scope. The noise of the crowd was distant here, muffled by glass and walls, as if the city itself were just a stage below. He watched the streets fill with motion, with color. with the slow procession of a car gleaming like a beacon. His breath was steady, his hand sure. He had all the time in the world. The motorcade entered downtown Dallas. The canyon of buildings amplified the cheers, the sound ricocheting off glass and stone. Flags flapped in the wind. Confetti drifted from windows. Sunlight flashed against steel. It was a parade of hope, wrapped in a fragile shell of vulnerability. Kennedy raised his hand again, smiling broadly, unaware of the narrowing streets ahead, unaware of the man in the shadows, unaware that every second now was being counted. History leaned closer. Destiny quickened its pace. And as the limousine turned toward Dealey Plaza, the day began to darken, not in light but in fate. The last turn, the limousine glided through the streets of Dallas, its polished chrome flashing under the noonday sun. For the crowds pressed against sidewalks, leaning out of windows, standing on rooftops, this was the closest they would ever come to the President of the United States. For John F. Kennedy, it was a moment of connection, a living conversation between him and his people, carried not by words but by smiles, waves, the shared electricity of presence. Children balanced on their fatter shoulders, their little hands reaching out as if they could touch history itself. Housewives clutched purses against their chests, their eyes glistening with pride. Office workers in crisp shirts leaned from open windows, throwing shredded paper that rained down like confetti. Dallas had become a theater, its citizens a chorus, its streets a stage. And yet, beneath the cheers, an unease simmered. The Secret Service men, riding on the rear bumpers, scanned the crowd with hawk-like precision. Every sudden movement, every hand that darted forward, every object raised into the air sent ripples of tension through their muscles. Their eyes were never still, though their president's face remained calm, radiant, almost careless in its openness. The car turned onto Main Street. The cheers grew louder, funneled by the tall buildings that rose like canyon walls. Flags waved from poles. Sunlight flashed on glass, the sound echoing so loudly it seemed the city itself was applauding. Governor Connolly twisted in his seat, remarking once more on the size of the crowd. "Mr. President, you can't say Dallas doesn't love you." Kennedy grinned, his Boston accent curling the words. "You certainly can't." But as his laughter melted into the hum of the motorcade, something invisible pressed down on the air. The streets were narrowing, the path tightening. History was drawing its noose. High above the parade, on the 6th floor of the Texas School Book Depository, the air was different. Stale, silent, heavy with dust. A man crouched near the window, the rifle steady on the sill. Through the scope, the motorcade was no longer a procession of color and life. It was geometry, angles, movement patterns, timing. He breathed slowly, evenly, each inhale aligning with the mechanical rhythm of fate. The crowd's cheers reached his ears as a faint, distant hum, the sound of a world unaware. He shifted slightly, adjusting the scope, tracking the car as it crawled closer. The president's smile filled the circle of glass. The First Lady's pink suit glowed like a target painted in fabric. Below, the city remained unaware of its own transformation. Dealey Plaza approached, a small patch of open ground, hemmed by buildings, the triple underpass looming ahead like a dark mouth waiting to swallow the parade. Onlookers packed the grassy slopes, lining the curb, waving and cheering as the car slowed for the sharp turn onto Elm Street. For those in the crowd, it was a festival. For the men with earpieces and tight jaws, it was a nightmare narrowing into inevitability. The open-top limousine, moving at less than 15 miles per hour, seemed to crawl toward danger. Kennedy leaned forward slightly, his arm lifting in another wave. Jackie adjusted her hat, her gloved hand brushing his sleeve. The governor's wife turned once more, her voice floating above the din. "Mr. President, Dallas loves you." He smiled again, softer this time. And then, for reasons no one could explain, he glanced upward, toward the buildings, toward the windows that dotted the skyline. His eyes lingered, just for a moment, on the book depository. Then he turned back to the crowd, his smile undimmed. The motorcade slowed to make the final turn. The sun glared off the windshields, the air thick with noise. But in the space between cheers, there was something else. A pause, A silence threaded so thin it could be mistaken for nothing. A silence only history could hear. Every story has a point of no return. This was his. The last turn, the last smile, the last wave. The world was about to fracture. The shots that stopped time. The limousine eased onto Elm Street, the crowd thinning slightly as the buildings gave way to open sky. For a moment, it felt like a relief. The canyon of skyscraper behind them, the grassy knoll stretching wide to the right, the triple underpass ahead like a gateway to safety. The air was brilliant, golden. Flags rippled in the light breeze. The motorcade slowed to negotiate the curve, the president raising his hand once more in greeting. Jackie leaned closer, the pink fabric of her suit vivid against the dark leather seat. And then, the sound. It cracked through the air like the snapping of a massive whip. Sharp, metallic, final. For an instant, no one understood. Some thought it was fireworks, a car backfiring, a cheer too loud. Heads turned upward, searching. A mother on the curb pulled her child closer. A man shaded his eyes, frowning at the book depository windows. Inside the limousine, Kennedy's expression faltered. His hand paused midway, his body jerking slightly as if puzzled. Jackie turned toward him, her eyes wide, lips parting to ask a question that would never find words. The second shot came, louder, deadlier. This time, screams erupted. The crowd splintered, some ducking, some running, some frozen in disbelief. The joyous roar that had filled Dallas moments before twisted into chaos. Governor Connolly cried out, his body collapsing forward as a bullet tore through him. His wife Nellie's scream pierced the air, raw and unfiltered, as she reached to hold him upright. And then came the third shot. History itself seemed to hold its breath as the bullet found its mark. Kennedy's head snapped violently, the sound of impact swallowed by gasps and cries. Jackie's white glove, once pristine, now stained red as she reached in horror toward her husband. The motorcade became a storm of panic. Secret Service agents lunged forward, their bodies shields too late to matter. Clint Hill, sprinting from the follow-up car, hurled himself onto the back of the limousine, his face contorted with desperation. The limousine's driver, stunned for a fraction too long, slammed the accelerator. Tires screeched. The car lunged forward, fleeing the plaza even as the echoes of gunfire still rolled against the buildings. On the grassy knoll, people hit the ground, covering their heads, clutching loved ones. Others pointed upward, shouting. There, from the building, confusion reigned. No one knew where safety was, only that it no longer existed. Jackie leaned over her husband, her voice breaking into an anguished cry. Jack, oh my God, no. Her hands clutched him, as if willing his shattered form back into the man she knew. Her body, elegant and composed only minutes before, now became a shield of love and terror. The motorcade raced toward Parkland Hospital. Every second a war between life and death, hope and inevitability. But for Dallas, for America, for the world, time had already stopped. Elm Street was no longer just a road. It was an altar, a place where innocence died and history bled. The race against the inevitable. The limousine tore down Stemmons Freeway, its engine howling, the tires shrieking against the asphalt. Inside, time became fractured, seconds stretching into eternities, each heartbeat louder than the roar of the motor. Jackie was crouched over her husband, her pink suit drenched in scarlet. She clutched him desperately, her voice breaking in choked whispers. Jack, stay with me, please. His eyes fluttered, unfocused, his lips parting as though to form words that never came. Blood pooled, staining the leather seat, dripping onto her white gloves, turning them into symbols of horror. In the front seat, Governor Connolly groaned, his wife Nellie pressing against him, her hands trembling as she tried to stop the bleeding. You're going to be all right, she insisted, though her voice cracked, betraying the lie. The Secret Service men barked urgent orders, their radios alive with chaos. Parkland, now, clear the route. Their faces were masks of steel, but their eyes betrayed panic. They had failed their one duty, and no speed on earth could erase that failure. Clint Hill, sprawled across the trunk and clinging to the rear of the car, looked into the backseat. What he saw seared itself into his soul forever. Jackie, drenched in her husband's blood, her hands cupping fragments of a life slipping away. The image would haunt him, night after night, for the rest of his days. At Parkland Memorial Hospital, staff rushed to prepare. Word had traveled fast, but the details were vague. The president's been shot. The words passed from mouth to mouth, growing heavier with each repetition. Doctors assembled, nurses cleared rooms, orderlies wheeled stretchers into hallways. The trauma bay smelled of antiseptic and fear. And then the doors burst open. The limousine screeched to a halt. Agents leapt out, shouting, waving, pulling at the limp body inside. Jackie refused to let go, her arms locked around Kennedy, as if by holding him she could keep him tethered to the world. "Mrs. Kennedy, please," a doctor pleaded, his voice breaking with urgency. She didn't move. She couldn't. It was only when an agent gently pried her hands away, whispering, "We need to help him, ma'am," that she allowed them to lift him onto the stretcher. The president's body was rushed inside. His head lolled, blood trailing on the sheets, his complexion already pale. Jackie followed close behind, her face blank, her eyes unblinking, her suit a macabre testament to what had just unfolded. The trauma room filled with white coats and hurried commands. Start for fluids. Get blood ready. Intubate. Instruments clattered. Monitors beeped. Voices overlapped in a chorus of desperation. Dr. Malcolm Perry pressed his hands against the wound, his face set in grim determination. He knew, they all knew, but still they fought, as if defiance itself might bend reality. Cardiac massage now. Another doctor leaned in, compressing President's chest, his movements mechanical, rhythmic, useless. Nurses passed instruments, wiped blood, adjusted tubes. The room was a storm of action against a tide too strong to turn. Outside, the hallways filled with muffled sobs, frantic whispers, shuffling footsteps. Secret Service agents guarded every door, their eyes scanning, their jaws clenched, their earpieces buzzing with fragments of disbelief. The president's down, repeat, the president is down. Jackie sat in a chair just outside the trauma bay, motionless, her hands folded in her lap, though still covered in blood. She looked down at the stains on her suit and whispered, almost to herself, "I want them to see what they did to Jack." Her voice was flat, steady, the words not a plea but a vow. Inside, the battle waged on. The monitors screamed flat lines, doctors shouted, "We're losing him." Sweat ran down brows. Latex gloves turned crimson. Hope evaporated. Finally, the inevitable silence fell. A doctor lifted his head, his eyes meeting those of his colleagues. In that silence, everyone knew, but no one dared to say it yet. The fight was over. History had shifted, and in the room outside, Jackie Kennedy sat drenched in blood, her gaze fixed on the closed doors, as if she could still hear his voice through them. The world was about to hear the unthinkable. When the world stopped breathing, the trauma room fell into silence. The last attempt at resuscitation ended with a flat line, the monitors humming in merciless finality. The doctors stepped back, their gloved hands dripping red, their faces pale with the knowledge that history had shifted in their care. Dr. Malcolm Perry removed his mask, his voice breaking as he spoke. "There's nothing more we can do." At 1 p.m., the President of the United States was pronounced dead. The words hung heavy in the sterile air, as if even the walls recoiled from them. For the men and women in that room, the moment was both intimate and universal. They had lost not just a patient, but the leader of a nation, the embodiment of a dream, a man who had carried the weight of the free world on his shoulders. Outside, Jackie Kennedy sat in her blood-soaked suit, staring at the floor, when a doctor approached and gently whispered the truth. She did not cry, did not scream. She simply nodded once, her eyes fixed on some invisible point far beyond the hospital walls. "I want to see him," she said quietly. They led her back into the trauma room. The chaos had stilled. The machines lay silent. Her husband lay motionless, his face pale, his hair matted with blood. Jackie moved to his side, her gloved hand reaching out to touch his cheek. She bent down, kissed his forehead, and whispered something no one else could hear. The doctors and nurses looked away, giving her the moment. Some wept silently. Others stood rigid, their hearts split between duty and grief. When she finally stepped back, she straightened her suit, though it was ruined, stained with the proof of violence. "I'm not changing," she said flatly when offered clean clothes. "I want them to see what they did to Jack." It was not vanity, it was defiance, a testament of love and a silent accusation against the world. In the corridors of Parkland, chaos swirled. Secret Service agents argued in urgent whispers, their radios buzzing with fragments of disbelief. "The president is dead. Repeat, the president is dead." Every agent's face was etched with guilt, their eyes darting to Jackie, to the closed trauma doors, to the future unraveling before them. In another room, Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson was being shielded by agents. His face was gray, his body stiff, but his mind was already moving forward. The government could not remain leaderless. The chain of command had to be preserved. "Mr. Vice President," an agent whispered, "we need to move you to Air Force One. You'll take the oath there." Johnson said little, his silence heavy, his expression caught between shock and the crushing weight of sudden power. He knew the moment was not about him, and yet history was already placing the mantle on his shoulders. Outside Parkland Hospital, the crowd swelled. Rumors tore through the air like wildfire. "The president's been shot. He's alive. No, he's dead." Reporters clutched phones, shouting into receivers, their voices shaking as they relayed half-truths to a nation waiting in agony. When the official announcement came, it was as if the earth itself exhaled in grief. President John F. Kennedy died at approximately 1 o'clock Central Standard Time. Today here in Dallas, he died of a gunshot wound to the brain. The word spread through radios, televisions, telephones. Offices fell silent. Schools wept. Families huddled around television sets, unable to comprehend. For millions, it felt as though the sun itself had been extinguished. Back inside Parkland, Jackie remained near her husband's body. She refused to leave him, even as agents urged her to prepare for the transport. "He's not going anywhere without me," she said, her voice cold and unwavering. Outside, the casket was being prepared, dark with polish, lined with satin, a vessel not for a king, but for a young president who had once promised a new frontier. As they placed his body inside, Jackie stood nearby, her hand resting on the casket, her suit still stained, her face pale but unyielding. The motorcade that had begun as a parade of hope would leave as a funeral procession. Meanwhile, aboard Air Force One at Love Field, history shifted once more. Johnson stood in the narrow cabin, hand raised, as the oath of office was administered by a federal judge. Jackie stood beside him, her suit still soaked in blood, her eyes hollow but resolute. The photograph will become one of the most haunting in American history, a portrait of transition carved out of tragedy. The world had stopped breathing at Parkland Hospital, and in that silence, a new chapter, darker, heavier, began. The flight of silence. Air Force One sat on the tarmac at Love Field, its engines rumbling low, waiting like a silent witness to history. The casket was carried up the narrow stairs by Secret Service agents whose faces betrayed the unbearable weight of both duty and grief. Jackie walked beside it, her hand resting lightly on the polished wood, her pink suit still soaked in blood, refusing every offered change. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with silence. Conversations were hushed, movements careful, as though even the smallest sound might shatter the fragile composure holding everyone together. The casket was placed in the rear of the plane, draped with an American flag. Jackie took her seat directly beside it. She folded her hands in her lap, her body rigid, her eyes fixed forward. To those who passed, she did not speak, did not move. She was a statue carved from grief and dignity. When reporters later described the scene, they said she looked like a widow from another century, regal, tragic, untouchable. But in that moment, she was simply a wife, sitting vigil beside the body of the man she loved. At the front of the plane, Lyndon B. Johnson had already taken the oath of office. The words were spoken firmly, but even he knew that power won in tragedy tasted bitter. His face was gray, his eyes darting often toward the rear cabin, where the slain president lay. The image of Jackie standing beside him during the oath, blood on her suit, blankness in her stare, will become one of the defining photographs of the century. But in the moment, the plane itself was divided. The hum of engines filled the void where conversation might have been. Advisors whispered strategy. Military officers discussed security. Secret Service agents sat with their heads in their hands, replaying every second, wondering what they could have done differently. No answer came, only silence. As the plane lifted into the Texas sky, Dallas fell away beneath them. The city where 1,000 voices had cheered just hours before was now marked forever by gunfire. Dealey Plaza, Elm Street, the book depository, ordinary places transformed into scars on history's body. Jackie turned slightly toward the window, but she did not weep. She simply stared, her face pale, her gloved hand resting again on the casket. To her, the world outside no longer mattered. Her world was here, reduced to wood and silence. From the cockpit, the pilots maintained a steady voice, but even they felt the enormity of their burden. They weren't flying just passengers. They were carrying a fallen president, a shattered first lady, and a grieving nation. As the hours passed, Washington prepared. In the White House, staff removed personal belongings from the Oval Office, their hands trembling, their hearts breaking. Television anchors, with tears in their eyes, told the nation of the tragedy. Families sat around living rooms, the glow of black and white screens painting their faces pale. Children asked parents why. Parents had no answers. Church bells tolled across cities. Flags dipped to half-staff. A silence spread through the country, deeper than any words, heavier than any sermon. On the plane, Jackie finally leaned forward, resting her forehead against the flag that covered the casket. Her shoulders trembled, but no sound came. Those who watched knew they were witnessing something sacred. Grief stripped bare, private pain exposed to the weight of the world. One agent, standing nearby, whispered later, "She never broke down. Not once. She was iron." But inside her, oceans were breaking. As the aircraft descended toward Andrews Air Force Base, the night had already begun to fall. The runway lights glowed like candles in the darkness, waiting to receive their fallen leader. Outside, thousands had gathered, silent, holding vigil, their breaths visible in the cold November air. When the wheels touched down, the silence deepened. The nation held its breath. The doors opened. The casket emerged, carried slowly, solemnly into the dark night. Jackie followed, still unyielding, her pink suit a symbol now etched in history's memory. The flight had ended, but the mourning had only begun. A nation in mourning. Washington draped itself in black. Flags across the Capitol flew at half-staff, their fabric heavy in the November wind. The White House, once vibrant with children's laughter and political bustle, stood still as a mausoleum. Its windows reflected a country in mourning, its halls filled with the muffled steps of aides who now moved like shadows. The casket arrived under cover of night, carried with the precision of ritual. It was placed in the East Room, where Abraham Lincoln had once lain. Candles flickered softly, casting halos of light that trembled across the faces of mourners. Jackie stood beside it, motionless, her children held close. Caroline clutched her mother's hand, her small eyes wide with confusion. John fidgeted, too young to understand, too innocent to grasp that his father would never return. The silence was broken only by whispered prayers, the shuffle of feet, the occasional sob that escaped despite attempts to stifle it. Dignitaries filed in, their faces pale, their voices hushed. But all eyes eventually drifted to Jackie, the widow who had chosen not to hide her grief, but to bear it like a crown. The funeral procession moved through the streets of Washington days later. A horse-drawn caisson carried the flag-draped casket, its wheels grinding against the pavement, echoing in the hearts of millions who watched. The riderless horse followed, boots reversed in the stirrups, a silent symbol of a leader who would ride no more. The sound of muffled drums carried across the city, a heartbeat for a nation that felt its own had stopped. The bells tolled in rhythm, somber and unrelenting. Crowds lined the route, men removing their hats, women weeping openly. Children hoisted on shoulders for one final glimpse of history's march. Heads of state from around the world walked side by side. Charles de Gaulle, towering and solemn, Haile Selassie, regal in his silence. Leaders who had once been adversaries now united in grief. The streets of Washington became a tapestry of sorrow, woven by the footsteps of kings, presidents, and ordinary citizens alike. And at the heart of it, Jackie. She walked in her black veil, her children at her side, her every step steady, her every movement carved into the collective memory of the world. She was no longer just the First Lady. She was the embodiment of American resilience, carrying her husband's legacy not in speeches, but in silence. At Arlington National Cemetery, the casket was lowered into the earth. The bugler raised his trumpet, and the first notes of taps drifted into the air. Each sound was a blade, cutting into the soul of the nation. Soldiers fired the 21-gun salute, the thunder rolling across the hillside like the echo of battle. And then, the moment that would never be forgotten, Little John, in his tiny blue coat, raised his hand in salute as his father's casket passed. The gesture was unplanned, instinctive, innocent, yet it carried more weight than any speech, any eulogy. It was a goodbye of a son to his father, the farewell of a child to a hero, the final wound in the heart of a nation. Reporters wept. Soldiers turned their faces away. The world froze, knowing it was witnessing an image that would live forever. As the eternal flame was lit at Arlington, Jackie stood close, her veil fluttering in the cold wind, her children beside her. She whispered something only the fire might have heard. Perhaps a promise, perhaps a prayer. But as the flame took hold, it burned not just for John Fitzgerald Kennedy, but for the dream he had embodied. A dream of courage, progress, and hope. The crowd dispersed slowly, but the silence lingered. In living rooms across America, families sat before their televisions, their faces streaked with tears. In classrooms, children bowed their heads. In factories, offices, and farms, work stopped as the time itself demanded respect. The world had lost a leader. America had lost its innocence. And one family had lost a husband, a father, a heartbeat. That night, the flame flickered against the dark sky, steady and unyielding. Jackie returned to the White House with her children, her figure silhouetted in the doorway, her strength and armor forged in grief. For the nation, the funeral was an ending. For her, it was the beginning of life without him. And as the cameras faded, the world whispered a single truth. John F. Kennedy was gone, but the dream he carried still burned. His last 24 hours were not just the story of a man. They were the story of a nation that believed in hope and lost it in a single moment. John Fitzgerald Kennedy's smile, his words, his vision, they were silenced in Dallas. But silence does not erase dreams. His legacy still whispers through the flame at Arlington, through the salute of his little son, through the strength of a woman who refused to hide her grief. Perhaps that is what makes this story eternal. Not the bullets that ended his life, but the light that continues to burn long after. Because men die, but dreams, if we carry them, never do. If this story touched you, if you felt the weight of history and the fragility of life, then join us here, where forgotten truths and silent heroes live again. Subscribe to Silent Stories, because some stories should never be forgotten.